Hi, everybody. Charmaine McGuffey here for a little afternoon lunchtime live with Charmaine. Sorry, we had a little bit of a technical difficulty and people could not, I guess, see me or hear me. So I'm going to start again with our topic for today, which is criminal justice reform and what does it mean to you? Hi, Lynn Chalfant. How are you? Mary Carroll, my great campaign manager, welcome. Welcome very much. And what I want to say is criminal justice reform is so important to all of us. I mean, when we talk about criminal justice reform, I want you to put your thoughts, questions, etc. In the chat so that I can see what they are, and I'll certainly answer them for you. You know, I'm going to start with criminal justice reform means safer communities for all of us, quite frankly. And, you know, it's a reformative situation where we can create programs that move people along in life and give them opportunities, you know, outside of incarceration, because people do, quite frankly, make mistakes. I mean, you know, that's what happens sometimes in our lifetime. And I'm going to start this criminal justice reform program by telling you a little experience that I had in the jail. I've worked in that jail for many of my 33 years. And years ago, one day I was walking down the hallway in the jail and I encountered this young man. He was seated on a bench and he was waiting to be transported somewhere inside the jail. And as I got closer to him, I said, "Good morning, sir. How are you?" That's what I said. And do you know how he responded to me? He looked at me and he said, "You know what? I've been in this jail for almost 2 weeks, and you are the very first person to treat me with any respect, and I thank you for that." And, you know, that experience really did change the way I thought about incarceration. It made me think about what happens to a person who is incarcerated and how they feel, and the fact that they can be devoid of hope. I mean, you know, this young man was so appreciative, and all I did is just talk to him and just say something nice to him. You know, so these are things that are so important when we talk about what happens to people who are incarcerated. And, you know, for a very long time, we have been building up a system of mass incarceration in this country. It's due to the fact that we've been, you know, over-criminalizing certain behaviors, the fact that we've been, you know, putting people in jails and prisons for numbers and numbers of years, and we have the highest incarceration rate in the nation. I mean, in the world, I mean, our nation has the highest incarceration rate in the world. And, you know, do you know how many people we incarcerate? 2.4 million people are incarcerated in the United States. And of those people, there are 720,000 that are languishing in our jails as well. And so we need to find out what is driving this recidivism rate that we have, because that's a contributing factor as well. You know, we have abnormally high recidivism rates in the United States. For instance, our recidivism rate in the United States is much higher, 67%, and it's much higher than like a place like Norway. Norway has a recidivism rate of 20%. And remember that, you know, when we look at the reason for those disparities in the numbers and why we have such a large number here in the United States, it's because places like Norway, and I've read, I've looked, I've studied why those kinds of facilities in other countries do not have people returning on average to their jail. And it's because they use a system of restorative justice, not punitive incarceration. When people come into incarceration there, people are seen as productive. They are given skills, opportunities, and, you know, it's a very, very important thing to talk about when we talk about what happens to people that we incarcerate. And yeah, I have someone here who has sent me a message and said about that young man that I saw, that experience. I said, you saw him in a space where he was invisible or just an anonymous part of a blur to other officers. And that is, it's so insightful. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, because that's exactly right. We put people into jails and prisons, and then we want to forget about them because, oh, problem solved. Well, not solved. In fact, problem multiplied. That's how that works. And I do have Faith Gingrich is on here. And Faith, thank you so much for tuning in. And she says that's why we need to focus on a rehabilitative model, like when you put the effort into the Women's Recovery Pod. That's exactly right. And I want to tell you a little bit about that too. I created those programs, the Women's Recovery Pod. I created the Men's Veterans Pod and the Men's Exit Pod. All programs that are designed to move people along. And I'll tell you, there was a woman in our Heroin Recovery Pod when we started it just a few years ago. She came into that pod, and as she was recovering and as she did recover, she told a story about how just prior to being arrested and coming to jail, she had been contemplating suicide. I mean, she was that close to ending her life. And she came into our recovery pod, and what she learned in that pod, in that program, was that there is hope. There are so many people out there who want to help you, people who will bring opportunities to you and show you that life can be better. And I think that hope is a driving factor. And, I want to say this. When she got out of that heroin recovery pod months later, she didn't walk down the street about, to buy heroin. She was met by a peer mentor. And, she and her peer mentor worked out something. She was always in her lifetime, she always wanted to be a photographer. I mean, that was something she was good at. She enjoyed that. And her peer mentor was able to link her up with someone in the city here who, in fact, is a photographer. And he gave her one of his cameras, and he gave her some assignments. And he let her help him, take these photos and go out and learn about photography. And it moved her along. That's recovery right there. That's recovery. That's how you do it with the help of the community. And someone writes in, yes, Lily, I'm not sure how to say your first name. So I'm going to say, you're writing to me and saying, if you're not tired of talking about it, could you talk a bit about what defunding would mean in Hamilton County as it relates to reform, right? Defunding the police. So what I want to say about that is this. Look, in my career, I have seen justice and I've seen injustice. And I have seen situations where, social service people, social workers, mental health people have intervened in situations to a great success. They develop relationships. They understand some of the struggles that different people have with mental illness, with addiction, just with struggling in general in their life, right? And I've seen situations where, when police officers bring those kinds of skilled people to the table, it actually makes them stronger. It makes them stronger to be in a situation where they can then, in fact, evaluate what's the best remedy here. And I'll share a little story with you. I've been talking to a mental health professional who's been embedded with the police a very, very long time. He's absolutely wonderful. That's how I met him. And right now he works at a place that houses people who struggle with mental illness. So they got a call for a woman who was struggling. She was acting out. She was in a crisis, an active crisis, and the police showed up. So when the two officers got there, he approached them and he tried to talk to them. He was telling them, listen, this is who she is. These are some things you need to know about her. This is the illness she's struggling with. And you know what the police officers said? They said, you know what? You go stand over there because we're the cops and we're going to handle this. All right? So we don't need your intervention. And that's a true story. That was just a few weeks ago. And in the end, they had to fight her. In the end, they had to wrestle her to the ground, handcuff her. It was a use of force, to take her into incarceration. And, what happened then, a few weeks later, he called me. This same professional called me and he said, I want to tell you another story. He said, just the other day, we had a man here who was having a psychotic break. And he was being, pretty violent as far as in his apartment, throwing things and doing things like that. And he said this time when two different officers arrived, two police officers, they engaged him And he told them, he said, I explained what his illness was. I explained the best ways to approach him and ways that we could make, have him cooperate with us. And in the end, that's exactly what this man did. He wasn't happy about it. He was angry. He was in a mental health crisis, but he allowed those officers to handcuff him and take him into incarceration because the mental health professional was helping. And that's there you go. Those are stories that are successes, and that's exactly what we want to do when we talk about funding the police. We want to fund those mental health people. And, this is going to help the community as a whole because it makes our community safer when we have a fiscal responsibility, a moral responsibility to how we treat people fair and equally and the safety of the community. John Healy's asking me, do you think the collaborative agreement has made a difference in race relations in Cincinnati, greater Cincinnati? I absolutely do. I most certainly do. I think the model is fabulous. I think that, one of the issues that have come up recently about that collaborative is what they call a refresh. The fact that the collaborative has played out and now they want to refresh it, to strengthen it, just like you would any other program you put into place. Go back and look at what's working. Go back and find out what you can change to make it work better. I'm absolutely 100% on board for collaborative agreement. The sheriff's office, by the way, does not have a collaborative agreement. And, I will tell you that I am still going to use the outlines of that program to help law enforcement, to help deputies, to help people in the jail, to help our law enforcement on the street. And it's so important because criminal justice reform just means enhanced training for deputies, for de-escalation, training in implicit bias. I just saw on TV the other day, Jim Neal has finally, I'm going to say that in capital letters, finally embraced implicit bias training. He's been getting calls from the community to do that for years, and he resisted it. Because of our efforts, because of the protests, because of people speaking out, because we are going to change this system, he has now had to embrace implicit bias training in his department. And I've talked to citizens. I've talked to citizens that asked for it. They were put off. They were told, we're not going to do it. And now he has to do it. They're forced to. And that is exactly why we are doing what we do, which is bringing voices to this issue. And they're voices that people that are in jail, quite frankly, can't have. Because when you're incarcerated, you are cut off from society. It is a very isolating environment. I like people to know that because some people say, well, hi, Casey Irving, good afternoon, Sheriff McGuffey, I love that, thank you. And people who are in incarceration, they are very isolated and they're living in their own kind of bubble world where they don't get to improve, They sit and watch, quite frankly, Jerry Springer on TV all day. And, where does that get us? Right? We want to have a educative, cooperative, restorative environment for everybody that's sitting inside a jail or prison. Sam Black's on. Welcome, Sam. And he says, this may be outside your jurisdiction, but do you believe, 1, requiring officers to have a college degree, and 2, ending absolute qualified immunity? I'll say this. Officers who have a college degree do tend to have a more wider peripheral view of society because that's what we do when we go to college. We learn a lot of other points of view. We learn about the world, and I think education is a great thing. Nobody ever regrets having a broader education. So I do think that should be one of the requirements to be a police officer. And the other thing about qualified immunity is this. Officers need to be held accountable. We are holding people accountable for their behavior out in the larger public. Officers who wear that uniform and that badge need to be held accountable for our behavior, for what we say, what we do, how we act. All of those things count. And when you're talking about qualified immunity, you really don't want your officers out there thinking, hey, I can do whatever I want because all I have to do is show the badge. That is a very, very dangerous attitude for our officers to carry out there. Now, having said that, I will say this. Officers are oftentimes put in situations where you are making very split-second, rapid decisions. We want to help them with that, but at the same time, hold them accountable for that. So, to answer your question, qualified immunity is something that the courts are going to have to work out, that people are going to have to articulate what that is, what situations it applies to. Because, our officers, quite frankly, they're out there, they're encountering a lot of different situations. But I have zero tolerance for excessive use of force. It's the reason I'm on the outside looking in right now, because I had zero tolerance for excessive use of force. And I called officers to the table to be held accountable when prisoners were injured to the point of hospitalization, mind you. Those officers needed to be held accountable, and they were not, quite frankly. So, now that we have people speaking up and we have people speaking out and protests, which I think are very valuable to our social conversation, we are seeing police agencies now. They're sitting up, they're paying attention, and they're saying, yes, we will respond to the public's request for holding officers accountable. And I think, all of you, every last one of you who has participated in this endeavor can give themselves a pat on the back and say, you know what, I was a part of it. I was a part of the change. A part of the change is electing me as sheriff. That's the other thing I want to say, because quite frankly, I need to be the sheriff of Hamilton County so that I can help the community. I can help the community come in. I can help with transparency. I can help create an environment where we all pitch in and do the right thing. Casey Irvin asks, if the mayor does mandate the mask in public, what is your opinion on enforcing it? Wow, that's a great question. If there is a mandate for a mask, and as I see it, a public health mandate, I think there should be consequences. I mean, if there aren't consequences for not helping everyone with with health issues in general, then how can we even make a mandate? If we make a mandate, there should be fines attached to that. I don't know that we should incarcerate people, but I do think we can attach fines. There are things we can do to create consequences so that we all maintain a healthy environment. No one wants to get COVID-19. I don't care if you're 20 or 80. I mean, we already know how dangerous it is. And I encourage people to wear masks. I wear a mask whenever I go outside. And then John Healy writes, sometimes there are no good choices. That has to be taken into account when a LEO is charged with malfeasance. Law enforcement officer, I assume, right? Okay. And this is true. There are some times that law enforcement officers, and I've been there myself, I was out on patrol. I was in a specialized unit, electronic monitoring, right? And what we did was we served as patrol officers for the entire Hamilton County communities with a unique focus on monitoring people who were on incarceration with judges, right? The judges put those people in incarceration, in a home incarceration environment, and it's our job to monitor that and make sure that that goes well for the court and for the person. So I will say in those situations, I've been in situations where we've had to chase people. I've been in situations where, people have had guns in the home. Situations where we walk in and people aren't very accommodating to us, I'll put it that way. They're not friendly. They don't want to see us. They're in a bad mood. And it is very, very important that we understand those situations are challenging. They are challenging for officers. I've been there. I've been challenged by situations. And, through my training and the fact that I obviously had the help of other qualified and experienced police officers out there helping, we were able to navigate that environment without any tragic happenings to me in particular. But I can tell you that there's times when my heart was beaten out of my chest. I mean, and it's beaten so hard out of your chest in a situation that you kind of wonder if everybody sees it. That's how it feels. And those are not comfortable situations to be in as an officer. But there's situations that we're trained to deal with, and it's exactly why we wear the badge, right? And, you know, when we get back to, and I want to be very clear about the mask, I do not think we should incarcerate people, because someone's asking. I don't think we should incarcerate people for not wearing masks. I think that's going to compound the problem. I think we should find other ways to encourage people to wear masks in public because of the COVID-19. And here's a comment. It takes a lot of courage on your part to take on this role of service in such a dangerous setting. And I appreciate that, I do. And you know, here's the thing. I'm asking people to vote for me because I am going to be accountable to the public. The public is going to be my boss. And I've promised the public, who is going to be watching me, I've promised them that I am going to bring reform. I'm going to do my absolute best to make sure that every citizen is treated fairly, equitably, that everybody who encounters the police starts to really become trustful of the police. You know, that they trust the police, not mistrust, but trust. Because, you know, quite frankly, there are some people out there, and I've knocked on the doors in the neighborhood, really. I've knocked on the doors in the neighborhood, and people have answered the doors, and I say, hey, do you know who's running for sheriff? And some of them go, no, I don't, and we don't call the police in this neighborhood. I mean, I can't tell you, I've heard that a lot more than once. And it's, you're like, well, okay. And, you know, they don't want to know the sheriff. They're not trusting law enforcement. They don't call them. And we want a situation where safety is absolutely our priority. We, you know, law enforcement has a place in our society. When somebody goes into a bank and robs it at gunpoint, right, we need the police to respond to that. And I'll just point out this situation that happened, a year or so ago up at Fifth Third Bank. I mean, there were courageous women and men in uniform who ran into that situation where a man came in with a gun, didn't care who he shot, was shooting people, and our law enforcement officers ran straight into that situation and neutralized it. What a great job they did, and that's an example of needing the police. So somebody asked, what are your thoughts on more community outreach for the Hamilton County Sheriff's employees? So here's what I want to plan for that. I would like the Hamilton County Sheriff's employees to feel welcome at various luncheons. I want to encourage supervisors to go to those luncheons that the social service people out there put on, and different trainings and so forth. I want those people to be in neighborhood conversations. I want them to go to community meetings. I want to give them the freedom to participate in programs like taking kids to the Reds ball game, sports programs and so forth. I want to raise that profile. And so now it's time for me to wrap up. And somebody asked here, if you're elected, would you still have these live communication sessions with the public? I absolutely would. I would welcome that. I'm transparent, and obviously I love to talk. So yeah, 100%. All right, so please leave any suggestions for future topics below, and visit my website, McGuffeyforsheriff.com, and you'll find more info there about me, about what I'm going to do. And please follow me on social media and support my campaign. We need a new sheriff in Hamilton County, and it needs to be Charmaine McGuffey. Thank you so very much.